Hey friends. So today, first day of spring break for Katie and Annalise. And there's this, there's something that's happening for me. There's something that I'm working with, and it's around just the kind of, I think, the balance of energy in my life and the kind of relationship between being at home and being involved in various creative projects, because there's this, it's really interesting to me. I was speaking, I forget who I was talking to yesterday or the day before, talking about relationships and the friends that we make, right? The people that I'm connected to as friends. And I had this, I suppose, not too startling realization, but somewhat impactful realization that I have hardly any close friends aside from family, aside from, the relationships that flow through either, my family or Katie's family. And in this area, in the city where we live. And the thing that was almost more striking about that fact than the fact itself was that I barely noticed that. I barely clocked it. And the reason is not because I don't have any connections to people, but because those connections they're all over the country and sometimes the world. And I truly don't feel it as a deficit. Like, I genuinely don't feel like I'm lacking anything. And because I spend hours most days in contact with people who I'm deeply close to and, sharing projects with, sharing conversations with, insights with. So, but there was this kind of like realization, like, oh, this is really how my life looks. And there's a kind of I don't know, just I think a sort of registering that as a reality. And it's funny because it's, in some ways, it's almost like, I've said for years, ever since the way that I grew up, with traveling overseas very young and being bicultural, kind of having, being essentially a German kid and an American kid, all wholly, like a complete German kid and a complete American kid, kind of code switching between the two. And the kind of travel that involved at a young age. And I've said for years that I don't really feel like I have a geographical home. I have certain places that have been geographical fixtures in my life, but I wouldn't say I have a geographical home. And so and that kind of goes for people too. Although, I mean, the thing is, people can straddle space, right? You can be connected to people across massive distances sometimes, and you can also connect with people anywhere. I've connected with some of the closest people in my life. We've met up in various places. It's not like our connection is predicated on being in the same place and therefore spending time together. So in a way, where I am now, it almost feels like an extension of that in a way, or a very logical outgrowth of that. Um, and at the same time, I'm sort of like registering it as something I'm increasingly aware. I think with world events, what they are, and the pandemic having created the issues that it did, I think there's a growing awareness around our locality. What's our relationship with our locality? And that's something that I feel like it's almost like it's a foreign language to me. It's almost like I don't naturally build that relationship or something. Not because I don't appreciate it, and not because I don't, in a lot of ways I can very consciously say I value it. I value being connected to where I am physically. But I also almost subconsciously live my life across vast distances, as though those vast distances didn't exist, were no barrier. And I think, it's obviously sort of, or predictably, I'm acquainted with a lot of people who have a similar experience. So it's not something that feels unique to me at all. It's just something that I think I'm looking at, and kind of I think I'm curious to see what the effect would be of kind of connecting with where I am, and maybe letting that be a little more where I reside. I don't know if that's gonna change me fundamentally. I don't think that I can artificially make myself prioritize that over the way that I kind of naturally relate to the world and naturally relate to people. But I do think, everything I'm somebody for whom everything about my relationship to the world is something that I think is worth consciously exploring. It's worth being conscious of how I think about something, or how I engage with an area of my life, how I really am. And I think, maybe what's coming up a little bit is a sense that this is a pattern for me, that it's not that I'm not aware of it, but it's a pretty deep pattern. So unless I deliberately check in with it, it goes off the radar pretty easily. And and on one level, I want to say there's something really wonderful and kind of beautiful about connecting with people, primarily because we share interests, we share a passion, we share a project, we share something we mutually care about. We, and And I guess in my life, that thing has rarely been a physical place or a concrete community. It's been more subtle things. Um, and so, again, it's really interesting for me to kind of go about this exercise and take this look, because on the one hand, I'm conscious of wanting to hold all of this really kind of gently and not judge anything. But at the same time, I'm also kind of like, I kind of feel like there may be a blind spot in here for me. There may be some areas that if I do this practice, that they may come online for me in a new way. I may find myself discovering new things about myself. And that's ultimately kind of everything, what I was saying a minute ago about engaging with all domains of life consciously. That kind of opens the door to all of life being a practice of some kind. And that's certainly the way that I experience life. I experience life as a practice. Not as in like a dress rehearsal for the real show, but as a discipline. It's an ongoing, daily, moment to moment discipline, and the value that I experience in life seems to come from that. It seems to come from a regular movement in consciousness in a certain direction. So, even so, it's funny how it's funny what shows up as I lean into that thought, or that trajectory of thought, because just yesterday I was talking about my gratitude practice and what I feel the effects of that are, and just what I'm noticing as I bring that into my life really consciously. And one of the things that shows up, one of the things that I've noticed is that, first of all, I make real movement. I can feel a difference moment to moment when I have certain thoughts or certain patterns start to take hold of me. I can consciously affect that, and it's like I'm gaining control of my own psyche in a way. I'm gaining more and more the ability to drive my own car. That's wonderful. But the other thing I'm noticing is that as that happens, also lots of other seemingly very random stuff is happening. In other words, random, not as in like chaotic, but as in I couldn't have planned this. I couldn't have made this happen if I'd been trying to, make it happen. There's a current of energy and a current of experiences and opportunities that just shows up, and I can't. That I just have to experience. I'm reminded of what Sadhguru says, that life is not meant to be understood; it's meant to be experienced. Which I think it's such an important thing to remember, especially for people who use their mind a lot and can get stuck there. It's really good to remember that's not life. It's really not. that's really not where that's not where the rubber meets the road. That's a tool. The mind is just one tool among many, but the purpose of life, so there's a whole much deeper thing going on, and it's about experience and the things we can't control. So I think maybe what's showing up in this for me is just an appreciation of what, what this next, if I make a practice out of connecting with my locality, being here, what changes might that bring? And not trying to do that in a way that would manipulate what happens next, but just in a way that, as an experiment, to see, because I'm noticing powerful changes on a lot of levels with these other practices that are basically kind of pattern interrupt practices and adjusting alignment. They're alignment practices. That's really what they are. They're building alignment with the reality of who I am. And I think when I sense a bit of remove from an area of my life, it's becoming apparent. It's something that shows up, and I get the sense that, oh, okay, maybe this is something I could actually afford to take a little look at. So, yeah. It's not a very conclusive message for today's post, but it's where I've landed, and it's something that I'm unpacking little by little. So, thanks for watching. Love you. Have a wonderful day. I'll see you tomorrow.